Hey, it's your guy Tyrrell back with the interviews. Chelsea's win over Spurs at Stamford Bridge may have knocked them out of the title race, but it's dragged them back into the top four race in the Premier League. What did Chelsea do right? Where did Spurs go wrong? Don't worry, here at the interviews, we've got you covered. So on this edition of the interviews, we're going to briefly break down how Chelsea were able to sneak past Spurs. So before we get into today's video, don't forget to give our video a thumbs up if you do enjoy it. The bell below does give you daily notifications regarding our organic, unfiltered soccer/footy analysis. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. In today's video, we're going to break down the first half, see how both sides look to approach the game, and how Spurs were able to gain back control after making a tactical change. Then move to the second half, see how Chelsea were able to score their goals, and why Spurs were unable to test Willy Caballero. But first, let's get to the starting lineup. So we look at Chelsea 4-3-3, Higuain, Hazard, and Pedro up front. In midfield, Kovacic, Jorginho, and N'Golo Kanté. Spurs moving to a 4-2-3-1. Harry Kane up front, just ahead of Eriksen with Lamela and Son out in the wider areas, and Sissoko and Harry Winks in midfield. So now let's get to the first half, see how both sides look to approach the game, and how Spurs were able to cause Chelsea some issues after Maurizio Pochettino moved to a midfield diamond. So when we look at Spurs against Chelsea, we look at the shapes, we see Chelsea 4-3-3. In the Carabao Cup final, they did drop off a bit deeper to deal with Manchester City's threat going forward. They kind of did the same thing here. They weren't really eager to press as high as they normally do, and we saw Spurs being able to get the ball to push forward with Higuain just sitting near Winks. And here, Spurs oddly didn't really have anything going for them in terms of creating chances. We do know that they lack creativity in this midfield, and with Eriksen playing a bit higher near Jorginho, he was unable to get involved in the build-up play around the center of the pitch. So with that being said, you look at the way that both sides are lined up. It's technically Kanté against Winks, Sissoko against Kovacic, Jorginho against Eriksen, and that's a bit odd considering Lamela and Son were out in the wider areas, two players that could offer you energy and better pressing, but perhaps he wanted Eriksen closer to Kane because they felt that they could find avenues in behind the Chelsea fullbacks, which has been a theme for Chelsea this season that they've been trying to fix. But with that being said, Spurs never really troubled them in that opening period prior to the tactical change. And with that being said, what they did do, they obviously tried to press from the front. You would have Kane looking to press Luiz. You would have Jorginho stepping, you would have Eriksen stepping to Rudiger and try to block off the pass into Jorginho, and then have the fullbacks pushing forward, or have Son and Lamela pushing forward into the fullbacks with Winks and Sissoko picking up their men there. And Chelsea were unable to really push forward with Rudiger and David Luiz being able to set the tempo, nor with Jorginho really having much of an influence in that deeper role. On the flip side, we did see Chelsea do the same thing, more so from goal kicks, and they caused Spurs some issues there as well. You'd have the center backs push out into wider areas. You'd have Pedro and Eden Hazard step out to them. You would have Sissoko and Winks drop off in between Higuain. Higuain would move to the player that did get the ball. There was one time where we saw Sissoko get it and Higuain harry him, and that would leave Kanté and Kovacic to step out to the fullbacks if the ball was played out into those areas, and that's where they really harmed them. We saw Chelsea close the gap on one occasion where Higuain stepped to Toby Alderweireld, Pedro stepping to Davies, Kanté stepping to Winks, and the pass was played into Son, and Azpilicueta stepped in to win the ball there. One of the Chelsea's best chances in the first half did see Lloris try to play out the back. He played the ball into Davinson Sanchez, who was pressed by Hazard, and he dropped it back to Lloris. And oddly, you do see Winks step into the box to show an option, but he tries to play the difficult pass into Davies, and Pedro does intercept it, but Pedro ends up laying the ball off to Hazard instead of possibly shooting or playing it instantly into Hazard, and Hazard lays it off to Higuain, unable to really force an issue there. Chelsea did hit the post, so a combination play from Kanté, Hazard, and Higuain that led to an Azpilicueta cross into the box where Sissoko made a mistake, and it did fall to Higuain, who sliced his effort wide off the post. But when you break down Chelsea's chances and where they were finding real avenues, it was Higuain dropping off a bit deeper to link play. Hazard wasn't really involved. We had Kanté kind of drifting out into this right-sided role in behind Son. We saw him push forward with powerful runs to skip past Davies, skip past Winks, and skip past Son. And then besides that, we never really saw anything else from Chelsea in that regard. They weren't really testing Lloris besides the shot that hit off the post. And even when Kovacic tried to drop off a bit deeper, you would have Lamela step to him to try and press him to get on the ball. Lamela was pivotal. He was dropping off to dispossess teammates and nip the ball away. He dropped off to dispossess Alonso, dropped off to dispossess Jorginho as well. But besides that, Spurs' system wasn't working. So when Pochettino decided to move to a midfield diamond, we eventually saw the change. That change from the midfield diamond being now Spurs could press more effectively from the front. They would have Son and Kane sitting on the two center backs. They would have Lamela on Jorginho to offer more of a press and force him into some issues. When they push the ball out into wider areas, Chelsea, now they could have Eriksen step out to Azpilicueta, and that would leave Winks to step to the spare man that Eriksen would have in Conte, and vice versa. Sissoko had to push out to Marcus Alonso. Then you would have Winks step to Kovacic and close down that space there. So they were pressing well from the front. Chelsea were struggling now to move the ball forward, and more so there were additional perks to the system now because of the way Chelsea were playing much deeper, a bit more reserved. Was now you could have Sissoko drop off a bit deeper like he normally does and push Trippier to peg back Alonso. You could have Son dart into the space in between Alonso and Luis to use his pace to cause them issues. You have the press from Jorginho on Jorginho with Lamela, and in deeper positions now Eriksen was able to get on the ball and offer more of a threat, and we saw that within their best chances of the first half following the tactical change. The first one, within seconds, Eriksen picking up the ball and locating Son darting in between that space, and he's able to chest the ball down in right half space, but Alonso did well to recover and clear his lines there. The second opportunity saw a bit of both, because what happened was that Kovacic was able to evade a press from Sissoko and Son and slide the ball out to Alonso, who split them and played a pass into Jorginho. But quickly to pounce was Lamela, wins the ball, and ends up falling to Harry Kane, who slides the ball in between Alonso and in between Luis again for Son breaking into the box, but Luis comes across to make the block. But you see what they're trying to do. Yes, they didn't force Willie into any saves, but we see how they're able to find avenues in that wide position to cause Chelsea a threat. And that is where Spurs were really looking to harm them. They had, with Sissoko dropping off a bit deeper, now they had a 2v1 against Eden Hazard for large portions of the game, and he struggled because when it wasn't a 2v1, Trippier would track him across the pitch, and you would have Sissoko dropping off a bit deeper. So that threat nullified anything that Hazard was trying to do down the left-hand side. We had Winks hit the crossbar, but the same thing kind of applied for Chelsea now, because with Chelsea dropping off into a 4-5-1, they had now Higuain sitting on Winks, and when they look to push players out, because what they like to do is that if Higuain steps to a center back, they'll have a shuttler step out. So if Kovacic stepped to a center back, you would have Jorginho move into his player as well. That was a big risk, and that was key in the second half with Jorginho moving out of position, because it does allow Son and Lamela to drop into that space to occupy it and turn forward to create attacks. But besides that, Spurs moving to a 4-4-2 diamond did make sense, and it did cause Chelsea some issues. So now let's get to the second half, see how Chelsea looked to cope with that midfield diamond and how they were able to claim 3 points. Chelsea started the second half much better, pressing from the front with a bit more energy. Like I said, nothing really changed in the way that they did go about their business. The wider players sticking to the center backs. You had Higuain sitting ahead of Winks, and that was how they looked to close it down, and Spurs were never able to build out of the back from that regard. And as we saw in open play, just Hazard and Pedro stepping to Davies and Trippier, closing them down much quicker, and that really flustered Spurs in the earlier stages. But Spurs did the same thing now with their midfield diamond. They had the front two playing into that hands. We saw Jorginho stepping in, and he was marked out as well by Lamela, and eventually we saw Conte trying to push forward into that space, but Eriksen was ready to pinch and step forward if the ball was played to him. So Chelsea never really had a free outlet out of the back throughout the entire game, and that was a big issue for them. But when we look at the game and how it really broke down, Chelsea were able to get the go-ahead goal. It just stemmed, and it goes to show when we've seen the benefits of the midfield diamond from Spurs in the first half, this is one of the issues that could arise when you play the midfield diamond, and that's Eden Hazard dropping off ahead of Trippier, and he instantly sees Spurs very narrow, and what does he do? He instantly switches the ball out to Azpilicueta. Eriksen is caught out of position, so now he has to track into that space to try and get to Azpilicueta, but he's a bit too far, too many yards out. So what happens is that now you see Davies step to him, and that allows allows Pedro to make that inside run out into the right channel, which pulls out Alderweireld, and he's luckily able to skip by him, and Lloris should do better to save that shot, but that's just a system breakdown there. What happens is that when you play the midfield diamond, the shuttlers have to occupy the central areas of the pitch, and it allows the fullbacks to push forward. Chelsea, with Hazard dropping off, were able to execute that plan superbly, and Pedro, with a bit of luck, was able to get past Alderweireld and put Chelsea ahead. So with that being said, now we saw Willian come on for Hazard, who looked a bit tired. Chelsea dropped off a bit deeper, and in that 4-5-1, they also encountered some issues. And the issue was, we saw it towards the start of the second half, Jorginho was pushing out to press players, and when he did push out to get out of his position to press a marker in, let's say, Sissoko, what would happen was that we would have his marker in Conte kind of push over to step into Lamela. With that being said, as the second half wore on, Higuain stopped pressing wings, and we saw Jorginho stepping to him. And with Jorginho stepping to him, that leaves, like I said, Lamela free and Son free if he wants to drop off to occupy that space to pick up the ball. And we saw that on 2 occasions where Jorginho was pulled out of position and Chelsea were struggling. The first one, we see Winks play the pass in between Higuain and in between Jorginho for Lamela, and then Lamela is able to split Kovacic and Conte for Son dropping off ahead of the narrow back four, and with Luis coming across and Conte dropping off a bit deeper, he's able to play it across them and split them as well for Eriksen, who takes his first touch across Azpilicueta, but luckily for him, Pedro does well to track back and intervene. But just as easy as that was, just Jorginho pulling out of position and Spurs' additional midfielders that are playing in attacking zones stepping into these spaces to cause Chelsea some problems. Shortly after that, we have Eriksen stepping into Sissoko. We have Eriksen stepping into Conte. That 50-50 ball ends up falling to Sissoko, and he's able to split Jorginho once again. Split Jorginho and Conte, and that ball falls to Lamela, who's able to chip it up ahead to Son. And what happens now is that Son locates Davies breaking ahead in that left channel because Pedro is narrow. He ends up playing that ball into him, and he finds Kane ahead of the 6-yard box, but he's unable to hit his shot first time, a bit too high, a bit too powerful. But again, Chelsea players moving out of position, Spurs finding those holes, but eventually they did drop off again. They had Higuain stick to wings, and Chelsea just looked much better with Jorginho sitting off in that base shape. But the problem here now was that with Llorente coming on to replace Son, then we had Lamela sit on Jorginho. Lamela did very good here, dropping off to dispossess Alonso, dispossess Jorginho, dispossess Pedro. But here, with them sitting off, there was an outlet for Trippier to push forward, and oddly with Chelsea, Willian wasn't tracking it, Kovacic wasn't stepping forward, Alonso wasn't getting across, so they were delivering crosses into the box now with 2 natural center forwards that could occupy Rudiger and David Luiz, but Chelsea were lucky and got off the hook there. We saw Ruben Loftus-Cheek come on for Kovacic. We eventually saw Lucas Moura come on for Son and Giroud come on for Higuain, and Spurs gave up the game in the simplest of fashions. Giroud winning the header over Davison Sanchez to fall to Trippier, and Willian putting a half press on him, not really even looking to win the ball back, and Lloris stepping out, miscommunication, and Trippier plays the ball into his own net. But we break down the game as a whole. Chelsea look much better when they are retreating into their base shape, but they were struggling to create chances in this game. The midfield diamond did eventually cause them some issues, but in the second half with a bit more energy and being able to utilize that wing play from Azpilicueta pushing forward, they were able to get the go-ahead goal, and we're lucky that Spurs were unable to really expose Jorginho stepping forward. So this is a very fortunate win for Chelsea that pushes them back into that top 4 race and drags Spurs into it as well. But let me know what you guys think. Which side has the better chance of finishing out in the top 4, and who will benefit the most from it? Is it Chelsea? Is it Spurs? Meet me in the comments below. Don't forget to upload videos every day, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. And that was your daily dose of the interviews.